Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome to some Total War Warhammer. So there's plenty of people who are doing the campaign, so we're going to be talking about something a little bit sort of different here. We're going to be talking a little bit about sort of basic strategy for people who are just getting into the game, and then getting into some more advanced stuff a little bit later. So what we're going to start off talking about is just very, very basic strategies. This is stuff that works in any Total War game. It would work if you went back and played Shogun 2, if you played Empire Total War, or anything like that. And this basically is going to be forming sort of a line of battle, rallying around your general and sort of keeping your units in a cohesive front while trying to outflank your enemy and sort of attack them that way. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about basic infantry lines, a little bit of missile infantry, and then cavalry and chariots and so on and so forth. We could potentially also talk a little bit about artillery, but basically in a sort of typical Total War game, if you're a complete new player, the way that you typically go about this is you take a battle line of general infantry here. You can take something like, for example, swordsmen, and then maybe you take some elite swordsmen or something like that, and this forms a battle line, and this is used basically to hold up the enemy and grind through them very, very slowly. Now, it's possible to win if you've got more infantry and they're higher quality than your opponents, to simply win with infantry, and this is going to be common in something like a Shogun 2 sword rush, katana rush. This was something that was very common. Haven't seen too much of that yet, but I'm imagining that melee rushes are very, very prevalent and very, very effective. I don't see any particular reason why you couldn't do one, but I do think that, again, a balanced army is almost always a little bit of a better answer. Missile units, these are for keeping distance and sort of pegging away at high-value targets or squishy targets or anything of that sort. And then cavalry, of course, is to decisively charge down enemy infantry by getting those rear charges. And sort of the way that you win decisively in games like this is you surround your opponent, and that's not sort of just on the macro scale. It means that if you've got like a swordsman unit engaged in the front, and then you sandwich the unit that's attacking that swordsman with a cavalry unit, then you'll be able to very, very easily beat that unit that's been sandwiched between them. And that sort of lets you destroy the enemy army very, very quickly. So that's basically the strategy to go to for pretty much every Total War game. Every war game should have some element of that, because that outflanking maneuver is really the sort of cornerstone of basic strategy. So the other thing that you'll want to keep in mind if you're a very, very new player, keep your general alive. It's just very, very important. So what you want to do typically just starting out here is have a good battle line of a solid infantry or what have you. Now, there doesn't have to be too much attention paid to what type of infantry you're guessing. You probably want to have like some spearmen potentially if you want to counter cavalry very, very cheaply. They're very effective at that without costing all that much. Or if you're against heavily armored knights, you can take halberdiers. They're much more expensive, but they're effective against armor, and they're, effective against horses. So there's sort of those combinations and nuances, but for the most part, your units can be used where they need to be based on, proximity, essentially. If there's a unit of knights that you have to take out and the only unit that's nearby are your swordsmen, then you might have to use your swordsmen. If there is a unit of infantry nearby that you have to fight and the only thing that you've got there is your spearmen, then you might have to use your spearmen. So basically, you just want to attack your enemy with what you happen to have. Now, you'll want to pay attention to who you're up against, because let's say I'm against Bretonnia here. If that is the case, then obviously you're going to want spears, which are good against cavalry. So there is a little bit of that rock, paper, scissors, but don't worry too much about that. Just think about this in terms of positioning your units correctly and using them for the right things whenever you get the chance. So using your infantry to bog down the enemy army, using your missile units to attack the enemy army elements as they approach, and then to continue attacking vital targets that are not in melee combat. Handgunners, a little bit more advanced unit, we'll talk about them a little bit later. And cavalry to move around the flanks, to defeat other cavalry, of course, as well. So there's sort of lots of those sort of very basic elements. And once everything sort of falls into place, you can generally win fights. So let's go ahead and hit battles here and go for a quick one here. So we're going to be doing a very, very basic battle composition here, and we don't know necessarily what we're going to be up against, but this is going to be the style of army that anyone could take and probably do okay with, depending on what they're up against. And it's going to be based around that sort of idea of protecting your missile troops, which are going to be causing consistent bits of damage picking away at enemy weak points potentially. It's going to be about keeping your infantry and using it to hold up the enemy while you sort of move around the flanks and attack them with your other units, and try and outflank them with cavalry, winning the cavalry fight, of course, being vital for that. But we can see here we're up against Popes. He's going to be playing as dwarves. This is going to make things a little bit different. So we're going to switch over to the Empire, because that's what we're going to be playing as. We'll switch to an Empire General, just a basic one. That's going to be fine. Now, the thing about being against dwarves is you kind of have to have some anti-dwarf stuff. So I will be taking a little bit of artillery here, but we'll take some crossbows here. We'll take a little bit of Empire Knights there, and we'll go ahead and take a mortar. I think we'll take 2 more great swords, and then we're going to spend the rest of our points on veterancy here. So with the higher veterancy, the swordsmen are going to be okay. Obviously, he'll still be better since dwarven units are just better than mine, but infantry units at any rate. But the great swords, very, very effective. Crossbowmen can do some damage. The Empire Knights, he has no cavalry, so that's why we're taking this particular composition to a certain extent. But yeah, we're going to hopefully be able to defeat our opponent using a very, very sort of conventional battle line with a little bit of mortar support. Now, you do want to pay attention to what you're up against, but it shouldn't dominate your sort of strategy too much. It's just in these cases where it's just like, if you're up against Vampire Counts, you know that there's going to be 0 ranged units. There's no point in worrying about shields. You know you're going to be up against tons and tons of monsters, because that's what Vampire Counts players plays. If you're against Bretonnia, you know you're going to be facing cavalry probably. If you know you're up against dwarves, you know that they cannot take any cavalry. So there are certain situations where you know what your enemy is going to not have because they don't have them on their list, but other times you have to be a little bit more careful. Like that Bretonnia example, they do have the potential to take like an all-melee infantry rush army, and if you're unprepared for that, you could get overwhelmed. Although, admittedly, I don't know how that could actually beat you. It just might. Alright, so looks like our opponent has taken a flame cannon, which is actually a really effective counter to a lot of the units that I've brought here. But so the way that you sort of want to arrange your army in a very normal, stereotypical battle is just have a straight line of infantry, keep them all together, and make sure that they're not getting too far apart. You don't want necessarily to chase things too much, but that's what cavalry's for. You want to use your cavalry, more mobile element, to look for and hunt for ranged units, and you want to look for and hunt for those rear charges you could potentially be getting. All of those sort of things are going to be really vital to your success. I'm going to go ahead and put our swordsmen in the center. I feel like we can probably get away with just taking our great swords and putting them on the flanks here. And we're going to basically ignore the unit sort of counter system, because even amongst infantry there's kind of a counter system. I don't really want to pay too much attention to it, because I do think that it gets a little tiny bit complex. It's honestly not that hard to remember it, but it might be a little bit too much to talk about for one episode here. There we go. So let's go ahead and hit ready. So yeah, swordsmen in center, you got crossbowmen just behind. The crossbowmen are going to be protected by those swordsmen. We're going to try and take out any of his ranged elements. If he's taken gunners, for example, they have less range than me, and I can try and take them out with my crossbows, whereas if he's taken crossbows himself, we can get into a skirmishing fight. Other than that, though, swordsmen, basically very, very poor unit by comparison to the dwarven units. They've got some decent stats here because I've upgraded them, and decent stats all around, but nothing fantastic. Like, these guys will lose against a lot of comparable cost units, but they're relatively cost effective and make a good battle line. The great swords are great at crushing through enemy units, very, very durable as well, so they do much better in many respects. There we go. We'll go ahead and move up a bit. Alright, we're just going to move up a tiny bit here. What have we got there? A Thane. We've got Thunderers. Let's actually attack these miners with our artillery piece. You can see he's got these gyrocopters coming around my flanks, and we're going to go ahead and try and shoot them down with our crossbowmen. Think of them for now as just being a lot like sort of missile cavalry, basically, in the air. He's probably going to try and go for my Empire Knights, I think. Oh, these are the Brimstone ones. Okay. So we're gonna... Now, the nice thing about this is that the unit that he's firing at is an armored one, so I'm not actually too concerned about this. They don't do great damage against armored units, though they do good morale damage to armored units. Alright, so miners over there are taking a little bit of artillery fire, a little bit of damage from it, which is good. We'll start switching over to these Thunderers just because they're clustered a little bit more awkwardly. Get flame cannons over there. Okay. We're taking a little bit of damage on our guys there, but honestly, nothing so bad. He is taking damage a lot faster than I am, so... We're going to get ready to attack our opponent because he's got, as you can see, a very, very weak melee line. He's taken a lot of ranged units, a lot of artillery. He's guarding his flanks with Longbeards and Slayers and Longbeards, or Ironbreakers, okay. So he has got some very, very tough units as well, but nothing that I really feel makes him stand out in melee. He's definitely got what feels more like a skirmishing army to me. We're going to get our cavalry around these flanks here. They're going to be very, very important against a very missile-heavy faction, but we're going to sort of mostly focus on our units otherwise. Just getting in combat at this point in time. Not letting him shoot me too much. He's got a better flank position on this side, which is why he's killing more of my guys on this side. Let's go ahead and move these guys over here. Cavalry moving wide across the flanks like this is going to be quite good. Haven't seen any of these crash yet, which is a little bit disappointing. Would love to see some of these go down. Alright, so Slayers, not particularly good against Swordsmen. Can actually probably charge that gunner unit there with our swordsman, or with our general. Some of his range units are not firing there. Ironbreakers have are starting to use their charges because they do actually have explosives, which is kind of nonsense, but not supposed to. But let's go ahead and move you guys. Yeah, move you guys over that way still. Getting a little bit of a slow down here. Ready! Get our cavalry around. Yes, General. Sir. Now, at this point in time, it really doesn't matter all that much that I've got all this this mortar or anything like that. It's not going to really be useful, but it's going to be nice to have things charging into his lines here. Hopefully we'll be able to overwhelm him relatively in melee combat. Longbeards over here are going to be able to easily beat the unit they're fighting, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. Let's go ahead and bring up all of our buffs here, just to make our line hold out a little bit better. My general should be able to take out Thunderers relatively okay. Charge into these guys over here. Alright, so we've got Ironbreakers and I think the Thane over there. Alright. Let's get these guys back into the fight here. Thunderers, as you can see, are actually doing a decent job of surviving getting shot here, so we're attacked there, but Swordsmen over here are broken. General! Looks like our general's doing okay, but he's being attacked by, oh, that's their enemy's general over there. Not ideal, but let's get some support for our general over to there. There's Thorgrim over there fighting my cavalry. Alright, so here you can see that we've started to clean up a lot of our opponents here. Let's just fire everything in this ranged unit over there. Ooh, he managed to get off a really good Ironbreaker attack there. Fortunately, he's kind of bombing his general a little bit. Alright, let's charge these great weapons into there. We'll ignore their general for just a second. Charge our general into his. Alright, these guys should be going down pretty quickly. So you can see that basically we just managed to overwhelm our opponent with infantry. He didn't really have the counters in place to win in a melee fight against me, just because I had much more melee infantry, more melee units in general. So we managed to crush through his line pretty decisively. Does he have more? Did those come back? God damn it. Alright, let's get you guys up here. Our missile units, by contrast, didn't do too much just because he had so many more of them. He would have won an arranged fight pretty handily. Let's go ahead and boost up our units here a little bit. See if we can't kill this guy's general. Of course, we're hitting our own units now. Let's just turn off fire at will here for a second. Alright, so yeah, their general is basically doing worse than mine. We can see that a lot of this infantry is not here starting to break. The Iron Breakers have broken. Slayers are still fighting because they will fight to the death 100% of the time, as will their general, of course. But yeah, so very, very basic battle line here. Just ran up and started sword rushing my opponent because my opponent had vastly superior ranged units. This is sort of the flexibility that's afforded if you take sort of a balanced army. An army that's got a little bit of artillery, for example, a little bit of ranged units, a little bit of cavalry, a little bit of infantry, sort of all of that working together. You can do a lot more than if you sort of focus on taking too many of one type, and it's hard to judge what that is, how much that is. But it definitely does happen. So here we can see Iron Fist over there, and he's managed to get himself killed there. So let's take a look at our disparate compositions here. So you can see that my opponent, he relied on things like heroes. He took 2 of them, whereas I just took the one general there. He's got some miners, which are a sort of gimmick unit with charges. Very, very effective at blowing things up if they manage to use them, but don't necessarily rack up enough kills. Great for softening up units, though. Longbeards, Slayers, which are anti-large. It was a weird choice to take Slayers against me because I don't have any large units at all. Very expensive units. Ironbreakers, extremely powerful unit with the charges, with the really, really heavy armor. They're very, very effective. But if you've only got sort of like a thin line of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units, that's only 5 units of melee troops, and only really 2 of them are cost-effective ones. The Longbeards and the Ironbreakers are both very cost-effective. The Miners can be sometimes, but the Slayers are not. They got a lot of kills in this particular case, but they're not actually cost-effective because they're very, very expensive. They're designed for killing specific elite targets and units. He had sort of 2 flyer units and then these 2 gunner units, which didn't get to do a whole lot, 2 correlers. So he had a lot of shooting units. He had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 missile units in this army composition, which is too many for what he had otherwise. So I definitely did not want to get into a missile fight against this guy with my 3 units of crossbowmen and my 1 mortar. That would not have worked for me. I would have definitely lost against his shooting. So in this particular case, it was less of using the battle line to sort of hold up the enemy. It was more using the battle line to get through the enemy and get at these more vulnerable units, and we were able to do that here. Even though I got to the flame cannon pretty quickly, did rack up 49 kills, which is quite a lot. So let's go ahead and hit continue here. So yeah, that's just sort of the very, very basics of this. You just take you can just take an army without any gimmicks, relying on things like great swords, swordsmen. Why do you not take all great swords? Well, they don't provide very much of a battle line. If we were to look at this in this sort of sense here, if I took sword, say like 7 great swords here, this is a lot of our income. We were down a lot. So if I replace 4 of these with 4 units of swordsmen, regular swordsmen, there we go. We've got a ton more money to sort of fill it with other things, and this is good enough at holding the line, and you just use these to kill the enemy where you need to. If I had taken all great swords, that that doesn't make a great battle line. If I take all sort of like handgunners, that doesn't make a great battle line. It's sort of using sort of these mixes of troops that you're going to want to ideally do in a lot of cases. So that's our very, very basic look at a very simple composition and sort of one of the ways that you can use it. You do have to look at what your opponent's doing and react to it. As you can see, that's what I did there. But I think once you've sort of gotten the hang of what everyone's sort of doing, looking at their army at a glance, you should be able to have an idea of what they're doing. If they have dramatically more missile units, then you use your army to rush them. If they have dramatically more melee units, then sort of turtle up, try and stretch your lines a little bit, try and use your missile units to your best advantage, try and get those flank attacks, try and destroy his army bit by bit. If he's got way more cavalry than you typically want to box up a little bit, so those sort of things. So anyway, I hope you found this video enjoyable, and of course, as always, I hope to see you all next time.